The path to mastery leads through the heart of adversity. Challenge is the raw material from which courage and strength are forged. Warriors are not defined by events. Warriors define them. Warriors conquer themselves before all else. Warriors are relentless in their service to others. Join us as we open our hearts and hone our minds to a razor's edge. It doesn't matter how slow you go, only that you do not stop. Your time is now. And now your host, Jason McKenzie.
So this is an episode that falls into the WTF category. Like, you know, if you think you've struggled in your life, holy shit. Let's just put it that way. So my conversation today is with Christine McDonald. And I mean, her story is basically unfucking believable. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I mean, this woman has, she's survived human trafficking, like been a victim, been trafficked, let's say. She's been homeless and just all of the stigma and horribleness that, you know, we level against homeless people. And she's been an addict. And like, as if that wasn't enough, then she moves through that. I mean, you know, enters the part of her journey where she's starting to say move past that. I guess he never really moved past it, but enters a new phase of her journey, gets pregnant, and now gets a disease that forced her to choose between her unborn child and her eyesight. So now she's blind. And she is the most incredible person, like unbelievable. I don't think I'm really going to give it much of an intro other than to say that she's, you know, now she's an internationally recognized author and speaker on the social injustices facing underserved populations today. Like, what an advocate, you know, like I'm just in awe of her. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. Like, you have to listen to this episode. You have to listen to it because you have to understand what the human spirit is truly capable of. Like, we all feel, I'm not going to leave it at that. We all feel and have felt like we've been in the shit, man. You know what? But I think if you listen to this story, it might rearrange your perception of, even if it doesn't, you know, just, it doesn't matter. It's not a comparison. Actually, I should even stop saying that. It's not really a comparison. It's just more like, listen to her story and understand what the human spirit is capable of. Because it's inspiring as hell. And every single one of us can do to have more inspiration in our life, no matter what we're doing or where we're at. So, man, I'm going to leave it at that. But thank you, Christine, for the work you're doing. And thank you so much for taking the time with me. And thank you for inspiring the hell out of me. And I am sorry it took me so long to publish this episode because I suck sometimes. But I'm working to get better. Anyways, so if you want to support the show, you can do it in all the normal ways. Leave us a review on iTunes. Like, that'd be super helpful. Just makes a difference, right? It helps more people find the show and it helps us spread the message. The other thing you can do is, support us on Patreon. So patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors. You know, it costs money to run the show, and, your support makes it easier for me to cover my costs and also easier for me to expand the message, right? Through whether it's advertising or offering different products and services. So, I mean, I appreciate that extremely a lot. And the other thing I'm going to tell you is, if you're a guy looking for a tribe, if you're a guy who feels isolated and alone, like he doesn't have anybody to talk to, wants to grow, your kind of relationship with your buddies is stagnant. You start talking about the same old shit. You're drinking beers, talking smack. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I mean, if that's the totality of your interactions, let me tell you, there's a whole lot more out there. And an instantaneous way for you to find a completely different level of brotherhood is to join the Dad Edge Alliance. So I'll include a link to that in the show notes page. It's run by my buddy, my good friend, Larry Hagner. And, I'm telling you, it's a fucking game changer. It is a fucking game changer. So one of the best investments, you know, when you buy a new coat to feel better or a new phone to feel better or a new car to feel better, you know how that never works or it's extremely temporary. one of the best investments in time, money, and energy that you can make is getting yourself around a better group of people that are more in line with your values and people that are pushing themselves to improve and supporting each other in the process. So do it. It changes everything. And at least just have a fucking conversation about it. Like, seriously, there's no obligation here. I can talk to you about it. Larry can talk to you about it. Our buddy Jeff Bowman can talk to you about it. There is no obligation, but for God's sakes, just open your mind to exploring different avenues of what might be possible. I mean, what is the harm that can come from that? That's actually how we grow as human beings, is by challenging our paradigms and continuing to grow. So, one more time, do it! And now, on to the episode. Hey, Christine, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
Well, hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and just so the audience knows, this is actually attempt number 2, and we were just talking before we started recording that we're both feeling good about this. So I'm optimistic. So here we go. It's interesting. There's so many things I want to talk to you about, and one thing that I think is fascinating that we had started talking about the last time was the criminalization of addiction. And one of the reasons it's fascinating to me is because I attended this talk the other day by a guy named Kim John Payne, and he's a real advocate of what he calls simplicity parenting. But he told this story of he's from New Zealand, and he told this, or Australia, but he was in New Zealand, and he told this story about this tribe that he was working with. And these kids in this tribe, these young adults, had transgressed. They had damaged somebody's car, for example. And what they did in this tribe was, instead of punishing somebody or these kids, or like casting them out, whether it was, criminalizing their behavior or whatever, they came together as a community, and they almost like brought the kids in closer, and they worked through the problem with the kids, and they brought everybody together, and they had like a tribal council, and they all talked about how it had impacted them. And then there was some retribution, to make it right, that everybody collectively decided on. And I was just so struck by that. And then on the flip side, how friggin' weird it is what we do with people. So I don't know, maybe we could start talking about that and just see where the conversation goes.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. A couple things, I guess one would be, a narrative. And then the second part of that would be an example of some of the things that we do at the organizations that I work for, and have been a part of developing the program and on our responses. But I'll share a narrative first, because as you know, I'm an author, and so I'm a storyteller by just natural creation, right? So we criminalize the homeless, we criminalize the addicted, we criminalize the mentally ill, especially in America. The mentally ill end up, populating our jails and our prison systems because we really don't have alternatives. I love the way that village came together, but look how much more time, energy, and effort that takes, right? Look how much more effort we have to put in to come together collectively as a whole, to unite, to support, rather than just punitively respond. It's easier to throw them in a cell somewhere, right? But then we're spending taxpayers' dollars to house them. Services aren't being rented, and then they're integrated back into the community without supports, and so the cycle continues. My history itself, I spent, 20 years homeless, addicted, a survivor of domestic minor trafficking. I mean, I've been arrested 103 times and the majority of those arrests, and that would be just like arrest. That did not include my, 7 prison stints. But the majority of my arrests were during my time of homelessness. Like, I would get arrested for like sleeping on the church steps. Well, where else am I going to sleep, right? And so you're trespassing. So the police come, they take you to jail. You see a judge. You rack up all these charges. You get a ticket for trespassing. You're homeless, so you don't have any money, right? So then you end up, they let you go, and then you get another warrant because you didn't show up for court. Well, you're homeless. You probably don't know what day it is, what year it is, and I don't know. I don't know. I guess I have run into certain people that were homeless that, lived in pay-by-the-week hotels. That wasn't my experience as a homeless person. My homelessness was literally living in a park and living outdoors and sleeping in abandoned buildings. And so I didn't own a watch, right? And so I didn't make court dates. And then you get a bench warrant because you got a failure to appear. Now you got a ticket for trespassing plus a failure to appear. So now you got two experiences with the police. And I know one time I had gone down to a feeding place where you could go on the weekends and get a brown bag, but you had to take the food off the church lot to eat. And so I'd gone back to the park where I kind of was my little safe place where I'd slept a lot in with my food and my tea. And I got over to the right, like as I was approaching the park, the police pulled me over. And I'm like, oh, I don't have any warrants. I'm good, right? So they tell me to put my brown bag of bologna sandwich, dry bologna and my glass of tea down. And I do. I set them down on the curb and put my hands on the car. And they're searching me. And I'm like, okay. So he gets in the car and he comes back out and he's got his little ticket book and he writes me a ticket for littering. I'm like, wait a minute. You had me put my sandwich down so you could run my name and I don't have any warrants. So now you're going to get me for littering. So then I see the paddy wagon come, right? So now you're like investing because there were two officers in that car. Now the paddy wagon comes. There's another officer. Now you got three officers, taxpayers' dollars for somebody that's homeless, right?
I didn't even know a paddy wagon was still a thing.
It is. Yes, it is a thing. I mean, hey, yeah, I guess you're in Canada, so maybe you guys have risen above. We have it in the United States. And so I go to jail and they give me, they hold me, so they book me. So, it takes a couple officers to book you in fingerprints. So now you're tying up a couple more officers, and then they put me in a cell and they keep me for 4 hours, and then they transport me downtown where they sign me out and give me a ticket and a court date to come for my littering ticket. Now I'm homeless. So now I got a ticket and I'm going back to the street, back to my park. And, of course I missed my court date and then I get a failure to appear. So then I go to jail. So now I'm tying up the judge, tying up the courtroom, and then I get 10 days in jail, right? So look at all those dollars spent, right, in a punitive response that doesn't change anything.
Wow. Yeah, no kidding. That is crazy.
And it's the same thing with addiction, right? So I live in Missouri, and we're considered a punishment state, not a rehabilitation state when it comes to our criminal justice, our prison. So our prison system and how it operates on a state level. Now we have come a long ways, and we are shifting to more rehabilitation, but we're still looked at and viewed through a very punitive. So when you go in, you're probably not going to get into any classes. You're probably not going to get an education, and you're probably not. I mean, you're going to get a GED because that's mandatory if you don't have a GED. But we don't offer college classes, and there's very few skills offered in the prison systems. And then the waiting lists are so great. They make the requirements to get into some of those like basically insurmountable because they get the people that are most likely to succeed, cherry picking, if you will, those programs that are going to get out, and they're going to have support systems on the outside, which is just such a small amount of people. And so the people that need it the most, like the addicts that need to be in treatment and they need some skills, they just don't have those same opportunities. So you go into prisons, you go into jails, and time stands still. You work for the Department of Corrections for $750 a month, and you get a little 4-hour shift, 4 days a week, and you make $7 a month. So you can buy your own toothpaste and deodorant because they don't provide that for you. And then you don't get the help for your addiction, and then you're put back in the outside, and then now you got a felony conviction. You can't get a job. You haven't gotten the supports that you need for your addiction and your substance abuse because we don't rally around them. And then they go back to what they know, what's familiar, after they're discouraged by not getting a job because they're a felon, or by not having people to walk them through and really help them navigate services. There's such a disconnect between service provisions and service availabilities and really how to navigate the system, because sometimes you have to have so many pieces of documents. It's daunting in itself just to get picked. And then back to that cherry picking, lots of times the people that need the help the most, like chronic homeless, addiction, mentally ill, don't get the help in navigating those service provisions, and then they get frustrated, and then they get lost in the shuffle, or agency service cherry pick, and they say they're not likely to be a big success, and so therefore their grant numbers aren't going to be successful to their donors, and so they don't get the help that they need. And so the people that need the help the most are the people that end up just being band-aided by the justice system.
Oh my God. Wow. That was, I knew you were, I don't even know what to say to that. That is so messed up. God, when you compare it, and we look at ourselves as being like, you know, this first world country, we look down our nose at other people and their weird customs and cultures. Oh my God. So yeah. So, you know, and it's funny because I have personal experience, certainly not to that degree, but with my first wife who was mentally ill. I mean, just trying to navigate that system was, holy moly. It was really discouraging for sure.
Yes.
So you talked about addictions. I think, first of all, I want to take the addiction conversation sort of back to your origin story. But before I do that, I'm always curious because that's something I'm going through right now. Do you ever get sick of telling your story?
Yeah, I have a few credentials. I'm an author. I've written 2 books. If you want to read my story, buy my freaking book. The reality is narratives are great, and I don't mind using narrative and narrative, like the example that I gave about how the criminalization of the homelessness really doesn't change anything. It costs taxpayers dollars. Right? That's one thing. That's a useful narrative to prove a point and draw a picture. It's another thing to just freaking tell your story over and over again. Yes. I mean, that doesn't change anything. That doesn't, people in the trafficking arena will say that particular area. You know, they always want you, survivor, to tell their story. Well, my story doesn't change anything. It helps you know my narrative, but that's not educating, that's not training, and that's just sharing my narrative, my experience. And I think we have, as a culture, we're just so taken with drama and stuff, and we don't, I don't know why that is used as the way to pull the heartstrings. People do that for donors, and to me, it's exploitation of individuals. I mean, there are time and a place to share stories, and you can share parts of stories in order to use a point, but just getting invited, will you come share a story? Yeah, no, I'm not going to be able to do that for you. Sorry. What's the point? What's the purpose?
Well, and I think I was talking to somebody about this the other day who I was on an interview with, and what she said, which I think was interesting, because this is something that I'm grappling with too, because I feel like I'm at the point where, like, you know, I'm like, okay, like, I feel there's some importance in telling my story, but God, I'm so much more than that, right? And I have a contribution far beyond that, but I'm not, as time passes, I get less interested in telling it. And I was talking to somebody on another interview the other day, and what she said was, you know, it's moving beyond the wounded healer narrative, right? Like, I'm more than the wounded healer. I am actually
I like that.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So maybe instead of then going into all the details of your story, why don't you just talk to us about human sex trafficking? Because, I mean, like, I thought, you know, honestly, what you mentioned that last time, but when we started the conversation, and I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous now that I'm saying it out loud, but it's just one of those things that I never really thought about. And my idea of what it was like something that happened in Africa. I know that sounds so bad, but you know what I mean? Like, I just didn't think it was a thing that was going on in, like, North America.
Right. I think that's why we created such a fertile ground for it to happen in North America.
Probably. Absolutely.
Right.
So, tell us about, like, how pervasive is it? Like, who are these kids? Like, I don't know. I would just want to learn about it.
Well, you know, and so I'll start out by saying, number one, it's hard to get really great numbers when we're talking about an illegal activity. We're talking about people are not standing in line for us to count the numbers. It's just like illegal guns. We can't count the number of illegal guns in the United States, right? Because people aren't saying, I have 12 illegal guns in my shoebox in my closet, right? So when we're talking about an illegal sensitivity. Numbers and statistics are really challenging. And so I do know that recently here at UMKC in Kansas City, Missouri, there was a great research done by Allison Phillips, and part of her thesis was, doing some research, and she went through some scenarios with the police department and collected 5 years of arrest of individuals that had been arrested and engaged in law enforcement contacts. And then she did something called capture recapture, was just kind of like when you do, that's what we do when, the way we research and document deer and wildlife. And so they're able to they capture during certain times of the day, and then they can go back and identify which ones so they don't count them twice. And then through that, they're able to make a guesstimate of and evaluate the approximate number of deer, so they can decide, how long deer season can go without, retribution to its population. And so she did something similar to that. So she didn't recount people more than once in those encounters with law enforcement. And over the 5-year period of time, through all of the records that she went through, she came to the conclusion in her thesis that, and it's now been published and it's been cited in several places, that at any given day in Kansas City, Missouri, which, we're talking the Midwest, right? It's not like New York City or Chicago or LA, right? We're just talking Kansas City, Missouri, and the heartland of America. And at any given day, there's like 3,400 individuals selling sex.
Wow.
And are being sold for sex, I should say, rather than selling sex. I should say being sold for sex. And that's only the records that were released by the police department were only of those 18 and over. And so we know the demand for younger people is much higher. So with that, through her numbers and however they used to pull their statistics and gather their data, they come up with there was approximately 5,100 minors for sale, because we know that the youth, the younger boys and girls are in higher demand than the adults.
So you're saying,
and that's on any given day. Isn't that crazy?
That is, I'm just flabbergasted by that. Holy shit.
Right. Yeah. We just had a big arrest too. The FBI did a national sting. I want to say they got 78 kiddos, the youngest being 3 months old.
Oh my God.
On an FBI sting. It's a national sting. They do it every single year. It's called Operation Cross Country. This was, I believe, the 11th year. And, every year, they get, dozens and dozens of kids across America, and they strategically plan to do it every year. And they do it, during the month of October. And they, I think they got 220 individuals that are traffickers, or people that were selling or posting ads to sell minors. And rescued 78 minors, the youngest being 2 months old. Yeah, it's pretty, it's America. And so when we think about the adults, we know that of the adults that have been, surveyed across America, 86% approximately of those adults that have been questioned or surveyed were sold as minors. So they were actually domestically trafficked as minors in the United States, but nobody identified them. And then they became adults, and once they turned 18, of course, we just look at them as prostitutes, right? As if somehow something magical happens, on their birthday that freed them from, being, bought and sold by a trafficker, right?
So are you saying, sorry, what was that percentage again? This is hard to process.
86% of those adults that have been surveyed, and it's hard because, we get such a small amount. We're only able to really question and screen the individuals that actually get into a program or get questioned or get surveyed, and the rest that don't. And it's such an illegal activity, right? We don't have access to all the bodies, but they say about 86% of the adult women were victims as minors. So they were trafficking victims as minors, but nobody identified them. So they began being trafficked as children that nobody identified, and then they became adults. And then we as society just look at them as, prostitutes, because now they're 18, they're adults. And when we look at the definition, you don't have to have any proof under the federal guidelines. If you're under 18 in the United States of America, it's illegal to sell sex, period, or for sex to be, or anything of value to be exchanged for sex so anybody under that age is automatically falls into the category of a trafficking victim. As an adult, force, fraud, and coercion have to happen, and since so few of them actually get recovered as adults, it's much more difficult to calculate the numbers and the estimates. But if 80% of the people that are adults that have been questioned were trafficking victims as minors, we're pretty, you know what I'm saying? That's just like overwhelming to say, look how many kiddos are being paid for by adults, predominantly male, that are being victimized day in and day out across America, and we're not recovering them, right?
So is that so the 86%, that's of women who are sex workers now? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they say only about 6% of the adult women that are engaged in the world of commercial sex exploitation or prostitution are actually there by choice.
Wow.
So that would be only 6% would be, because when we think about choice, if they don't have options, right, or if they were trafficked as minors and this just becomes their normalcy and they don't know anything else, right, or they're bound by, they're possessed of their trafficker, right? Do they really have a choice? I mean, can you just walk away? What do you do? Just walk out and say, yeah, I'm leaving you today, right? And if your family's life is in threat, or, traffickers are the people that exploit these individuals that recruit them. There are sometimes, they get them in and they lure them, like maybe at a kiosk at the mall, which is a real popular way. They'll have like all these little things, and they'll have questions about, you want to be a model or you want to be an actress, you can sing, and they do these things, and they gather all this information, and then they fly them into California, or they fly them into places, and then they say, here's your job, and then before you know it, you're disconnected from your family because you're in a city you don't know, and then before you know it, this guy's got you in a position where you're compromised, and they're threatening your family because they've got all your personal information, because maybe you filled out all this information on this question at a kiosk in a mall that said, are you looking for a job? Do you want to start your actress career? Or are you trying to be a model? And you've collected all this information. Now they know where your family lives. They know that you have siblings, right? Mm-hmm. They have all this information. So then you're scared. So then what do you do? I mean, there's so many scenarios, and that's another thing. It makes it really hard to catch up with them, because there's so many scenarios that people use to exploit vulnerabilities. The people that end up in this usually have vulnerabilities. Maybe that's, especially in the foster care system. I mean, we just had these kids in Kansas that were disappeared. They didn't report them missing for like a month. The foster care system didn't report them missing for a month. I mean, when we have situations like this, they're perfect targets for a trafficker. Here, you need a home? I'll give you a home. Here, let's go buy you some new clothes, right? I'll tell you you're pretty. I'll give you a place to stay. And then before you know it, oh my God, what have I done? What has happened? And you're not going anywhere. You're trapped. I mean, what do you do? And who cares? You're in the foster system. Nobody's coming looking for you. You're lost. Unfortunately, the people that are in economic disparities are really, or dealing with families that maybe a fatherless home, so they're lacking that father figure, that male role. Well, there's a guy willing to fill that role for you. And then before you know it, you're caught up in a mess that you don't even realize how you got there. And then what do? Or you have the mom that's working two jobs to make ends meet because she's a single mom, and, you know, somebody's friending their kid online, right? And then before you know it, you know, she's being sold on back pages. You know, there's vulnerabilities that really make our kids, our youth, vulnerable for this. And then we have disposable kids. We have people in our society people don't care about. Nobody's going to go looking for them, and those are easy targets.
I actually feel sick to my stomach right now. This is the first time this has ever happened. Holy God. Just thinking about my own daughters, and I don't know if you've ever looked into this, but I'm really curious about, are there similarities or common characteristics between the men that do that? Like, obviously it's primarily men.
Uh-huh.
Are there like similarities or common histories or, you know, trauma or something that these people have typically experienced that caused them to become this?
Well, you know, I'm glad you brought that up. I would say on the majority of the level, no. Like when you look at some of the bigger scale pimping or trafficking rings, lots of times, no. Lots of times the fuel behind it is money.
Right.
But I have encountered some individuals. You know, I've been an advocate in, you know, the intersections between, you know, drugs and trafficking and mental illness. You know, those things intersect so hugely. So I've been doing this for about 11 years, and I have met. I met a guy that he's no longer in the life, and he got into it as a kid. He was like in the 7th grade and riding his bike, and his mom was addicted to drugs, and he had like 6 sisters, and he was the oldest. And she was prostituting herself to support her drug habit, and guys would just come into the house, and she would spend, you know, the welfare check and the food stamps, and he was the only male in the family, and he, being African American, living in the hood, it was easy for him to fall into that,
mm-hmm.
you know, drug dealing. He got into selling dope after school. He's like, well, if I can sell enough money to buy dope, I can give my mom drugs, and I can make sure there's food in the house, and there won't be men here harming my sisters. He was in the 7th grade, so my kid's 11, right? And so you're talking about 11-year-old kids. And so, you know, he did, you know, I think what seemed culturally the best solution he could come up with at the time, right? And in his own thinking, you know, from where he comes from. And so that's what he did. And eventually he ended up, you know, running women on the streets because it was easier for him than dealing drugs. And so he would sell drugs to the girls on the streets. And then he had several girls. They were his girls, and they would earn money and come back and, you know, always give them their money. And then he was going back, and he stayed there doing that, supplying drugs to his mom and keeping the food in the house until every single one of his sisters left that home. He eventually went to prison, and then when he got out, you know, he went to school and you know, changed his life, of course, and got into like heating and air conditioning or something like that. So of course that's not his lifestyle anymore. But you know, I kind of call him an accidental pimp, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right. And, you know, he'd shared stories about, you know, just getting, you know, hit as a kid with, you know, these guys that were coming in and paying for sex for his mom. They would get high and drunk, and it would just be total chaos. And he's like, you know, what am I going to do at 11 to protect my family? Right. And it's his mom. He loved her. Right. And he cared about his sisters, and he didn't want them to get hurt. And so he, you know, in his best thinking as an 11-year-old, right, this is what happened and where he ended up. You know,
it's amazing. It just drives home the lack of compassion we show one another when people are living in a way that we don't think conforms with our values. You know, it's just
yeah, religiosity and good moral judgments can do a lot of harm.
Well, yeah, for sure. And it's, you know, if you really stop and think about it, we're all like just potentially one traumatic event from being in that same situation, or a very similar situation that we could never imagine ourselves finding ourselves in. I mean, I went through that in my own life. I mean, I was a very judgmental person, and I never could have imagined when my wife got sick, like all of a sudden, honestly, it was like being the person on Oprah, where when you're watching Oprah, you go, "Oh my God, that could never happen to me." Like, become that person. It'd be like, Jesus,
Right.
come on, my life is Oprah's couch, basically. And it's amazing how quickly and unexpectedly that can happen. And once you go through it, I think for me anyways, it just gave me so much more compassion, about other people's stories, because there was people looking at me going, this guy's just fucked. Like, totally. Like, he's, you know what I mean? Like, but they had you can't imagine what it was like to live it every day, So, I mean, I just wish we had more compassion as individuals, as a society as a whole.
Yeah, I'll never forget sitting at a thing. I got this amazing standing ovation, about 600 people, and it was great. All these professionals, and I got done, and the individual got up at the microphone after me, and he said, "You guys all just went over there and stood in line to get a piece of her. You guys went over there and you wanted to hug her, you wanted to connect with her, and I watched you engage with her, right? And you guys, each and every one of you in this room, just as myself, if you would have saw her on a street corner back in that era of her life, you would have turned the other way and you would have kept on driving. And she's that same person today that she was then, the same human being that God designed. But yet, for some reason, today you see her of value, when he himself said he was as guilty as they would have been. I would have just drove on past her. I would have never looked twice. Right?
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful thing to think about.
Right? And I thought about that, and I chewed on that, and I'm like, you're right. None of these people would have said that to me. None of you would have handed me a sandwich. None of you would have, stopped when I'm walking in the snow with no shoes. None of you would have come when I was on the church steps. And why do I know that? Because for 20 years I lived that life and nobody did, right?
Yeah,
so,
but on the
right?
flip side of that, though, if you had the same upbringing they had, you might have been the same person they are when it comes to that,
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. I interviewed a guy in prison here not too long ago, and because after I heard this particular guy's story that I just shared, I really was curious, and I interviewed another guy who was doing like 25 years for trafficking. And come to find out, he got into it at 15. His uncle was a pimp, or a trafficker. They're pretty much the same thing. We just used to call it pimps. But a trafficker, and his dad was a trafficker. His brothers were either gangbangers or pimps. And then his grandfather was a pimp. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a generational normal for this family. This is what they saw as their hope of getting out of the project. This was their generational norm. It's what's expected of you for 3 generations. This is what you do.
Yeah,
where did somebody step in to try to mentor and guide them to break that cycle? Where was that community, that village of people to wrap around those people and show them other ways and say, you have other choices and this is how you navigate them. This is how we do it. Where were those people to walk alongside to break that cycle?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, my first wife used to be a cop, or was a cop, and she would come home and tell me, like, you seriously cannot even imagine. Like, there's people that I deal with that it is like 3, 4, 5 generations of this lifestyle. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you're not even.
It's normal to them. They don't see anything else because that's what you do.
Right. So how does. So I know, like you said earlier, a lot of people were being, what's the best way to say it? Like right way to say it? That are
being trafficked
being
or
trafficked?
working? Are you saying prostituted? The ones that are being prostituted? We say prostituted because that's like the action of something being done. And
Okay.
the dynamic I'll try to explain really quickly is the buyer, he's usually in a place of privilege. We know 68% of buyers of sex are Caucasian and have a college degree. Statistics of the ones that we've been able to collect, the best stated, we like I said, it's hard to get a complete accurate statistics, but when you talk about illegal activity, but about 58% of those are also married, right? And so we say that they're people of privilege. They're in a better place than the person being prostituted, that they're paying for their sexual pleasure. So they're being objectified into a sexual object and then you have the trafficker who's selling them for their profit. So it's kind of a triangle there, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So we call them prostituted, which means the action of something being done. So they're being sold and then they're being bought.
Okay, so when people manage to get out of this lifestyle, like try themselves free, like what are some of the paths that they take to get out of this? Like it's hard for me to imagine very many waking up one day and going, yeah, I'm going to escape and go to college. Like, so how does it work? Like, how is it possible? I guess, what kind of support do they have or do they need?
Well, unfortunately, it's starting to be a thing. It's starting to become, something where we're starting to reach out and have homes. I'm a director of a long-term therapeutic community for victims of commercial sex trafficking and that are leaving and that are trying to put their lives together. And so the journey is hard. I myself, I did get out and I did get a GED and I did go to college. And I did, and I'm fortunate. There's a lot of individuals that get out and, we have criminal records. Mm-hmm. We have criminal histories. Like I live in a state where we're one of 5 states that make prostitution itself a felony charge. And so even if they were trafficked, like we've only just since like 2001 acknowledged that trafficking's a thing, right? Even though it's gone on for like centuries, we've had people selling bodies for sex for, centuries, but we've just now kind of labeled it and said, we're acknowledging that this is happening. And so you got people that have these criminal backgrounds and nobody wants to hire them. They have, post-traumatic stress, sometimes they have, substance abuse disorders that they're dealing with, right? And so they need a whole lot of services, right? And trust is one of the biggest challenges is building that trust with that individual so that you can help them navigate through services. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have and the systems are set up that they just don't always work. I'm working with a girl right now. She's been out of the life. Her trafficker went to prison. And so she got into drug court. She got a housing voucher. She's been living in this place for like 19 months. But she's part of a thing that wouldn't allow her to get like food assistance. And she suffered several brain injuries in the life from abuse in being trafficked. Some by the buyers of sex, some by her trafficker. So she suffered a traumatic brain injury, and so she's permanently disabled. So she's out of the life, and she was in it for like 8 years. But because of that traumatic brain injury, she's on disability. She's never going to really be able to work a job. And she couldn't get food stamps. She was banned from food stamps because of a legislative policy that created a barrier for her to ever be able to get food stamps in her community. And the food pantries only let you go once a month because they have a database system that connects services, because you get 3 to 5 days of food, but you're not allowed to get more than 1 box of food a month. And all of the food pantries in that community speak to each other through this main network system. So you don't manipulate. God forbid you get more than 3 days worth of food.
Oh yeah.
But there's not a box that says, but I'm banned for life from food stamps and I can't tap into the SNAP program, which would allow me to get food assistance. So this is my only food option. So she, after like 19 months out of the life, her trafficker in prison, then clean, making all of her drug court appointments, all of her mental health appointments, all this stuff. She, what she would do is she'd get out of her drug court appointment and her mental health appointment, and she would go to the local mission and eat a free dinner meal every day for food. And so she got out late. This would be 5 weeks ago now. She got out late, so she missed getting to the mission to get her nightly supper. And so she's like, I'll do what I know. So she went to turn a trick to buy some food, and the guy wouldn't pay her, and she got out of the stop sign, and when she got out, he grabbed her to pull her in, and she pulled away from him, and he pulled a gun out and shot her in the arm. This girl had been out of the life for 19 months, and because of the way the system is set up, it wasn't set up for her to succeed, right? There were real barriers for her to tap into what we would look at as, well, she can't get food, she should go get food stamps. That's what that's for. Well, she fell in a crack. She couldn't get more food from the pantry, and she didn't have a network of supports around her, right? She didn't have that village to support her. And I mean, now we've got some systems into place. So we got churches that have adopted her, and so they're not putting that in the database. They're just going to help her because there's no reason she should have had to return to that just for food. And this is America.
You know, what I don't understand is so often, like, the narrative you hear is, you know, we need more programs, like we need more government programs. And I always look at it.
No, we don't.
No.
Where's the community?
And this is my point, right? Because, you know, you look at the fact that, for example, in Missouri, prostitution is a friggin' felony. You look at how the mechanism of government is what is being used to persecute these people in the first place, these victims, and then creates the problem. It helps create the problem, and then as a result, and then the system to support these people is just this mishmash pile of garbage, and people are like, it's like, and then what people say though is when they know that there's all this government, but then they feel disconnected from the community because they say, fuck, I'm paying taxes for this shit. You know what I mean? Right. And it's like, and it just, to me, it destroys the sense of community because we're relying on some unseen, faceless thing that coerces our tax money from us. And that's the way we support people. Like, how could that be a good idea? You say it a lot. It's so weird, doesn't it?
It is. It's crazy. And then, you know, when I posted this, I mean, I had hundreds and hundreds of people reaching out. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Isn't she getting food stamps? I said, no. She fell in, you know, everybody's like, well, tell her to get, that's tragic. Why wasn't she getting food stamps? I said, because she can't. Because, you know, she's banned part of this program, this lifetime ban because she had a drug sales in the 90s in Texas, and so she can never get food stamps in our state. I said, well, what about the food pantry? And I'm like, well, that'd be great, but she lives in a community that does the MAP system. Number one, she doesn't have a car. She'll never be able to drive because of her brain injury, so she uses the bus, and so she's restricted to what's in that bus zone for her to get to, and they have a MAP system which connects all food pantries, so you can't manipulate the food pantry. So you can only go once every 30 days for 3 to 5 days worth of food. That doesn't feed you for a whole month. So where is the community to support this girl? And you're right, she feels so disconnected. Number one, she has a brain injury. We know how our society views people with disabilities, right? Oh, she's already labeled as an ex-prostitute. Oh, let's not forget the felon label that we have on her. We don't see her as a human being trying to do, they don't see that for 19 months she helped testify against her trafficker, but yet the system is set up that you said she's a victim, you used her to testify against her trafficker, but the laws are set up that she can't even get food.
I wonder sometimes, like, it's interesting, I wonder how much of this is by design. Like, where does it... Right,
because we don't give a damn about the poor people. It's all about survival of the fittest. If you're in an economic place that you have options, right, to go to school, live in a safe neighborhood, you know, get an education, right, and you grow up in that, you're a lot less vulnerable, right, to be these people that are exploited, because most of trappers do exploit people that are coming from poverty, coming from broken homes, right? Caught up in a disease of addiction, maybe a mental illness, right? Homeless, all these vulnerable people, right? Are looking for a way out of the projects, right? I'm going to be a singer. I'm going to get out of the projects. I'm going to break the cycle of poverty for my family. And then I'm going off to LA. And then now I'm being bought and sold, right? All I wanted was a better life because I wanted to break the cycle of poverty. Right?
Yeah, God. So I could talk about, I'm just it's so awful to think about. It's just how we've gotten to this point. And again, our lack of empathy for people. It's
absolutely.
We would just be like, it's funny because I've been saying this a lot to people lately. And it's, when I look at somebody, so you look at somebody who's an addict, if you tend to look at the world through the eyes of people are doing the best they can, instead of
right,
if anybody's doing worse than you, they're worse than you. You know what I mean? Like it's just such it's just so much more of a compassionate way to look at the world. So I don't know. So tell me, so you said you're the director of this facility. So like on a practical basis, other than that, or maybe you can talk about that a little more, but what is the work that you're doing to help people or to shed light on what's going on here?
Well, I've written a couple books. My second book is all about trafficking and exploitation and how do we look at these people through their lens of how they got there as opposed to the action that we may use our good moral or our religiosity to view them through. How do we change that lens to a lens of what was the path that got them to where you're encountering them? And so I wrote that second book of mine just so we could really try to change that lens, right? And then like with our organization, we, like this Friday, we're having a huge men's event in Kansas City. So we're bringing men to the table. Men are, they're pretty much, they're viewing porn. Porn is just trafficking on camera. You still have a buyer. You still have, somebody being objectified, and you still have a victim. So how do we change the way we view human beings, our brothers and sisters, because males are victims too. So I train law enforcement. I do that on a regular basis. Like next week, I'll be training like 50 officers. So helping them understand by changing the way of, I understand their job is to protect and serve. And if the activity is illegal, their job is to arrest. But how do we look at individuals to, through a more victim-centered response, right? We're saying this is a crime against these individuals, and we're saying they're victims. So how do we do that trauma-informed and through a victim's lens versus a punitive lens, so that we can connect them into services? And it's hard because, it's hard. Number one, we've created a culture that a lot of people believe this doesn't happen here. And so that creates a fertile ground for, people to be bought and sold right in front of us. And then secondly, we have laws set up like, making prostitution a felony. Are you saying they're a victim or are you saying they're a felon? I mean, and so then they get out and they're treated as victims into a victim-centered program, but yet they've got felonies and nobody wants to hire them. And then who wants to just go say, hey, I was a sex trafficking victim, so I was bought and sold for sex. And then people with their good moral views, lens, looking at them says, oh, you were a prostitute? Because they don't understand the dynamics and complexities behind what gets individuals caught up into that whole world. And they don't understand the difference between prostitution and as choice, pro-sex work versus prostitution, no options, prostituted, sex trafficking. Right.
Mm-hmm. I got to tell you a story because I just thought of it as you were talking. But where I used to work, so I was one of senior leaders in this company, and I was always, as I started to go on my own personal development path, I guess, and started to be more open about my own story and talk about what I had been through. And obviously, everybody who does this knows this, that, it creates a safe place for people to tell their stories. And it's just such an amazing way to form human connection. But interestingly, this woman came into my office and closed the door, and she just told me that, and she was like, you never know, I mean, obviously you never know. I mean, that's the whole, there's no, you can't tell anything by just looking at someone, but she was very high performing professional, very, very capable. And she comes into my office and closes the door and goes, I feel really comfortable talking to you, and because, I know how open you are or whatever. And, I just want to tell somebody this. And for most of my 20s, I was addicted to all kinds of drugs, crystal meth, and I was a prostitute. And I was like, holy shit, thank you so much for telling me that. Like, I mean, I'm just so humbled.
Glad you felt safe with that, but
yeah, and then, but here's the craziest part of the story. And then she goes, I forget, we got talking. So it wasn't in this first conversation, but it was another conversation. We were talking, and I was telling her, she asked me what neighborhood I lived in. And so I told her, and she asked me my house number, and I told her, and she goes, during that time, get this, like when she was prostituting, she was doing it out of the house that I live in now. Like, what are the chances of that? I swear to God.
Wow.
Isn't that weird? Anyways, that's not really super relevant.
Crazy.
So, if the walls could talk. So,
right.
Yeah. So one thing I'm interested in knowing is, because I think we're having a really good conversation about, pulling back the veil, I guess, on some things that are going on and talking about them in a real way that a lot of times people aren't willing to or not interested in doing. And one thing I'm curious about is the culture of the homeless, I guess. And is there anything in that culture that we could learn and benefit from, like in our quote normal society? Because I bet you there's all kinds of things. I mean, no, but there's must be all kinds of things that are great.
There is something. I was homeless for 20 years. So I was homeless from away at 15, and I didn't get out of the streets, out of the park until like I was 36. So,
wow.
Right. And I'm fixing to be 49. So, I'll tell you, recently, I'm glad you did this, because I don't know if you follow my page at all, but I posted a few posts the last few days about my friend Harlan, who was shot in a park. There was a park that we all used to hang out at. We slept a lot. Like if we got food, we would go there and eat, and we'd share with each other, right? We'd share. One person had food, everybody had food, right? Even if, it's a sandwich and it's going 4 ways, right?
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine that I've known, like I've known him since probably 1990, he was homeless out on the streets. And I remember one time in the winter, I had, oh my gosh, I'll never forget. I had no shoes, I had jeans, I had on like a little tank top, and there's snow on the ground, and I'm on the corner and I'm standing there trying to make money, and I'm homeless. I got nowhere to go. Nobody's going to let me in their house, right? And he's walking down the street, and he's got on a pair of Dickie coveralls, and he's like, "What are you doing out here?" And I pointed over because, my pimp at the time, my pimp, he was across the street sitting in his car in the heat waiting for me to make money. And he's like, he took off his coveralls. They were Dickies. He took them off and he handed them to me. He said, "We can't be out here like this." And he had on like shorts and a shirt, and he took off his Dickies and gave them to me.
Wow.
That world was normal for us, right? I don't know many people that would just go up to somebody standing on the street and say, "Here, you got no shoes on. You're standing out here in the, and give you." I had a pair of heels in my hand, but I couldn't walk in my heels in the snow, right? And so, just give me their coveralls, right? And as I posted some different experiences from him, and he was shot in cold blood in this park where we spent so many years. We would sit in this park and we would share our dreams, we'd share our hopes, and we'd all years and years of shame and being beat down by being on the streets and being homeless and our addiction and just all these different things just made something outside of that world seem so far away. But we would all share those things openly and honestly, and then we would get up, and whether we panhandled or, you know, like me, I was a street prostitute, you know, and so when whatever that was, and whatever our demons were that we carried with us, we still had hopes and dreams, and we still shared those openly. And it's like we'd leave that park, we'd kind of leave our hopes and dreams there, but we'd also share our fears, and we'd also share our sorrows and our shame. And we would share those things with each other so transparently, right? And so authentically. And we don't, I don't see that same love, and I don't see that same bonding, and I don't see that care and concern with people that live in your own neighbors. I mean, how many people even know their neighbors, right, anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, and so Harlem was shot in cold blood. Somebody walked up to him in the park, shot him. And he was just a gentle soul. And there were just like dozens and dozens of people that posted things and comments about, oh my gosh, he gave me his coat. And oh my gosh, you know, he fed me. And oh my gosh, he had a place to stay. And so he let me sleep there because it was, you know, I had nowhere to go. You know, just all these different things. And it doesn't sound like much, but when you got nothing and you're sharing your nothing that might be a little better something than what the next person has, right? That means the world to you in the moment. And so the help might not look like what somebody on the outside looking in looks like real help, right? It's not like he handed him a check and said, here, get off the streets, but he had a coat and you didn't. Or, you know, he had a place where you could take a shower and eat, and you didn't. And so you could take a shower there too, right? And so that help looks different, right, than it would like in the normal world. But in that life, right, if you ain't had a shower in, you know, a week, and the only place of shower you got is to sneak in somebody's backyard and use their water spigot, and he's got a hotel room for the night because, you know, maybe his mom put him up for the night. And so you can go take a shower, and you can sleep in a bed safe, and you don't have to sell your body for food that day, right? That's meeting you where you are, right? And it sounds probably really, it's hard to explain to people that haven't lived in that world of homelessness and desperation and just in that world. But they care about each other in the best way they know how. And their nothing to us is something to them, and they'll share it.
Yeah, you know, in the mental health warriors group that I run, we did a book review, a book, sort of book club on this book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And so what this guy did is, he's a filmmaker and he's an author, and he was embedded with these soldiers way out in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan, in this horrible, horrible place where they were always under gunfire and all that kind of stuff. But what he said was, a lot of times people, when they come back from these environments, we talked about the problems that the military has reintegrating into society after they've been in a war zone. And he goes, like, the narrative is so often that, you know, they can't, there's so much adrenaline over there and they can't get that here. And so they have a hard time integrating or whatever. But what he was saying was, it's not that at all. His premise is that it's because in this environment, they had such a sense of bonding and community, and they were literally depending on each other for life and death.
For survival.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so when they get back, that's the thing they can't actually replicate, and they feel lost because our society is so disconnected. We don't really need each other for
bond with people. We don't.
Right. And so what I wanted to ask you about that was, how many, because while you were talking, I also pictured, I don't know if you remember I'm sure you remember the Shawshank Redemption, but there's this scene in there where a guy
I love that movie.
Right. And there's that scene in there where the guy gets out of prison for a long time, and he he was an important guy in prison, the old guy, and then he can't cut it. And I wonder, so how much does that play a role in people staying on the street? So for example, I've
seen people go back because it's like everybody knows who you are.
Right.
I have seen people just go back to that because they have that sense of belonging. And it sounds so warped and twisted, right? But because they can't get that. When you've been beaten and raped and you know your homies are going to take care of you and the police are going to say, were you involved in illegal activity when that person did it? right?
Yeah.
Right? And so they don't care, right? Or the police, one of your friends is murdered and they're picked up as a prostitute and the buyer, murders them and severs their limbs and just tosses them in the Missouri River or in a garbage dumpster, and then you find them and the police are like, well, if she wouldn't have been doing that, it would have happened, which is probably true. But the person that did it, intentionally targeted that person, right? Because of what they were doing, because they know nobody gives a damn. But you still mourn, you still hurt. I'm having a vigil in the park for Harlan because he was shot in cold blood in this park. And we decided to open it up so the street people can come and mourn too, because, for, 30 years, he's been homeless on those streets, and anybody that's been homeless in that era knows him. And so many people had stories, and some of those people are on the streets. Some of those people are off the streets, like me. I'm a program director of a large organization, and I have a college degree, but that doesn't change that bond and that tie that we have, because there were plenty of times that if he wouldn't have watched over me while I slept, I would have probably been murdered, right? There were plenty of times he gave me food that I might have, I would have been with that, or I would have had to go turn a trick just to eat.
All right. We are back after a small technical difficulty, but this topic is too important. We will not be deterred. So we were talking about homelessness. We were talking about the culture, what society could take. I don't know if we were done or not.
I don't know. I think we were just wrapping up the bond that people share. I mean, their nothing is something to people, and it can't be replicated. It is challenging. I've been off the streets 13 years, and I share in my first book the bond that I have with the people that made it out of that world alive, right? That I share with those people. I'm 13 years out in a college degree, right? I've never replicated that type of connection. And the friendship that we have even still today, I don't have those types of friendships with people in the square world, if you will.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting thing to think about? So, do you ever feel, okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this, because one of the things that I know.
Go ahead, I won't be offended.
No, it's more like just to make it make sense. Not to, but, one of the things I notice is that as I progress through time, sometimes I feel it's hard to, even though I'm talking about mental health a lot and all this stuff, sometimes I feel like it's hard to maintain a connection to the past because it's kind of fading away. Like, do you find that, or when you think back to what you went through? I mean, obviously it was severely traumatic, but I mean, is it still does the healing process, whatever that looks like for you, like, is it still as visceral to think back on, or is it more of, I don't know, how would you characterize it? I'm not even sure if my question made any sense, but.
There are still times that things, and I don't even know, I think in the beginning I would say triggers, kind of like we use in the substance abuse world, but things that would trigger me to really feel and sense those emotions would be part of my complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which I suffer from. But there are times that I feel really like I still go down to the streets where I was, bought and sold, and I still go sit on the steps sometimes where the last car I got in where I almost murdered somebody, and I was almost murdered, and that was kind of my moment that led by sequence of events to getting me out. But I used to sit on those steps and pray for a merciful God to let my life end, because I believe death was the only out for all of us, right? And so I still go there, and when I go there, I do feel like that connection, and I don't know that I really know how to articulate what that feels like. But there are moments that I'm walking through my house, and then just all of a sudden I realize, oh my gosh, I own a home. I'm safe today, and I have to really process that because it seems unreal at moments. But I'm still deeply engaged with the community. I run an organization that helps women leave the very community that I was trafficked in. So I'm down there on a consistent basis. I mean, I just had a girl that was on the streets when I was on the streets, and she's out there, and her pimp had beat her with a baseball bat, and she was in an abandoned building, and, you know, went out there, and she chose to stay. She's like, and the fear kept her there, and the fear of not only him and the repercussions if she ran into him again, but the fear of what does the world look like outside of this, right? And you know, kept her there, and it broke my heart. So I guess I'm still deeply ingrained, and I still communicate with people that have left the streets that have been off for years. And I do know our relationship is very different than, you know, the friends that I've made along the way since I've been off the streets.
How do you appreciate or look at that life differently now that you are out of it? Because one of the things I think, like to use an example from my own life, is the more time passes. So I used to have quite a drinking problem, and when I stopped drinking, I find the more time that passes where I evolve as a human being, and my trajectory takes me to a more and more of a different place than I would have been if I had stopped drinking. I tend to look back on drinking as worse and worse, right? Because I think, oh my God, none of this would have ever been possible if I had not stopped drinking. So do you look at your experience and what people are going through now differently now that you have been able to live, you know, what is the alternative and the life that was really hard for you to imagine during that time?
I think that changes. I think it depends on, you know, I spoke at a school, and when I got done, I was actually training some staff at a school for kiddos that were delinquent, and, you know, that kind of court-ordered juvenile school. And one of the teachers asked me a question and said, if you could write a letter to yourself, you know, to your younger self, you know, that old Oprah thing, to write a letter to your younger self, what would you say? What would you say to keep yourself, to prevent you to have ever experienced these things? And I thought about that, and I said, you know, I would say you'll survive. I said, because number one, if I wouldn't have run away that day, but I ran away from a whole lot of awful things, and I had been caught up in the foster system, and I kept getting reintegrated into my home life, and my mother had a mental illness, and I never knew my father, just all these different things that really set me up with vulnerabilities to make me a prime target for, you know, somebody to say, oh, here, you know, I've got clothes for you. I've got a safe place. I've got food. And I was 15, runaway, homeless, right, to fill in all of those gaps and make me feel safe and befriend me, which led me into my world of being trafficked. And so those vulnerabilities that led me to that. I think my letter would only say, you will survive. Just hold on. And I say that because I've lived it, and because I've made it to the other side, I have an empathy and I have a lens that other people don't. When my friend chose the driver so I guess the audience doesn't know this, but, you know, shortly after I got out of the life, and there weren't programs for people like me, but shortly when I got out, and when I got out, shortly after I got out, I met a guy, and I got pregnant. I had some complications, and in my last trimester, I went blind in 3 days. And I had a choice of medication to save my eyesight or the life of my unborn child. The medicine would have killed my child, and I chose my child. And shortly after the birth of my child, I had to have both my eyes medically removed. So I have 2 prosthetics. I'm totally blind. And so, so I had a driver, my friend that I just shared about, that, you know, she'd been beaten with a baseball bat by her pimp, and she was in the basement of this building, and when I was there, and, you know, she didn't want to leave with me. And so I told my driver, I said, I need to go get some concealer and some sunglasses. Can you drive me? And she's like, what are you doing? I said, if she's going to stay out here, she needs to at least be able to cover up those bruises, and she needs to have those glasses on, because nobody's going to pay for her. And if she doesn't make her quota, the same thing's going to happen again. And the next time she may not make it. And she's like, you're not going to try to convince her to come? I said, I can't make her come. If I make her go, right, I understand that fear, right? Mm-hmm. And so the woman, she's like, what? We're going to take her, right? We're going to call police. No, we're not. That's not going to fix anything. She's not going to press charges against them. right? And all that's going to happen is when the police go away and she doesn't, is he's going to beat her up again and say, what, you talking to the police for? And so that's not helpful. We have to meet people where they are. And we can't force people to make decisions because, you know, when we force people to make decisions, they usually aren't going to stick to them anyway. And so I'm able to empathize, I think, in a way that, but then there are other people that come in and get into the program and a few weeks into it and they're facing their demons and they're having nightmares and they're realizing, you know, all these things. And they would rather go get high and not think about all those things that happen. And they've been being bought and sold for, you know, 10 years. And rather than think about all of those things, they would rather be high so they don't have to think or face it, right? And with those people, I can look at them through a different lens and say, it's okay, it's scary and it's tough, but surviving out there wasn't easy either. Can we face this stuff? Can we do it together? And sometimes you have to let them go back. And sometimes you can still walk alongside with them and say, you know, we can do this. We can do this together. You don't have to do it alone. It's tough. Out there's tough and changing is tough. And we're all always scared of the unknown, right? And I think the way that lens looks for me is I've been on my knees begging my pimp not to hit me when I'm just asking for a drink of water. And I've been the person that watched my pimp beat up another girl and literally asked somebody, well, he doesn't hit me anymore. And they tell me he doesn't love you like he used to. She's his new number one. Mm-hmm. And then you go out and you hustle money and try to make more money because because that's the only validation. And as warped and twisted as it is, it's the only thing you know, and it becomes your norm. And because that bond, that the bond that you have when somebody decides if you eat, sleep, or breathe or live, right, is you're so intertwined, and the emotional roller coaster that takes you on it, and you're just the sleep deprivation, the food deprivation, just all these different complexities that play. It makes it, you've been there, you've done it, so you know. Mm-hmm. And because you know, you can empathize. What we don't do is we don't try to know in the real world so that we can empathize. So we only see them through our moral judgments and our religiosities based on what we know. And, you know, the books, the chapters of a book, you know, we all come into the world and that looks different. We all leave the world, which would be the back of the book, and that looks different. But in between, we have all these chapters that lead us up to where we are in our points of life and all these different things that formulate things. Unfortunately, we don't oftentimes be intentional to look beyond that.
One last question I wanted to ask you, and this is, I know we're coming close to the end of our time, and I want to respect that, but where does personal responsibility play into this? Because I'm sure you must hear, like, and I mean that kind of in two ways. So I'm sure one of the things you must hear from some of our more puritanical people is that, you know, we're all ultimately responsible for ourselves. And I guess the other aspect of that is, like, in some ways we are all responsible for ourselves in the sense that we can only be helped if we're willing to be helped. You know what I mean? Like you can't help someone. So how do you think about that, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think that would be like my friend Kim. I had to leave on the corner and I went and got her concealer and sunglasses. I can be here and I can let her know I love you. And I can let her know that I understand that leaving would be hard, but it ultimately is your choice, right? Nobody ever pulled up beside me and said, do you want out? I didn't know out was an option. Eventually, you know, you get beaten, you get raped, you get branded. I mean, I was branded with a cattle iron. I've been, you know, handcuffed in closets, and I mean, just all these different things. Eventually, all of that stuff leaves you that this is what you deserve, this is all you're good for. All of those things can play a part. And it takes a long time, I think. The human spirit is amazing, and I think it protects itself sometimes. You know, the smallest part of ourselves can be preserved. But I think that there are things that I'm responsible for. There are choices that I made that I'm absolutely responsible for. Absolutely. There are other things that I think with the information that I had, the knowledge that I knew, and the development of my brain as it was at the age that I was when everything began, that I made the best choices that I thought I was capable of making, or that I had enough information or knowledge in order to make at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to think about that sometimes. And if we don't know other things, we may not, if you don't have the information, if you don't know that you don't know.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. So listen, this has been, I found this incredibly illuminating. So I can't thank you enough for coming on here and teaching me something very important.
Well, thank you. Do you mind if I give a little plug for my books?
No, I was just about to ask you about that. Tell the audience where they can find more about you, find more about your book and all the other goodness that you have going on. And we'll link to all the stuff in the show notes page.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, I'm Christine McDonald, and my first book, which is kind of my narrative, it's snapshots of my narrative, I should say. And it's called Cry Purple, and I'm really excited. I got to meet Ron Hall, and the writer of The Same Kind of Different as Me recently, and spent some time with him. It was really great. And a film producer in Kansas City has reached out to me, and we are working on a project to bring Cry Purple to film. And so that's really an exciting project. We've already got our screenplay writer, and it's really exciting stuff. And then my second book, so Cry Purple, again, kind of my narrative. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online, anywhere. And then my second book, The Same Kind of Human, Seeing the Marginalized and Exploited Through Eyes of Grace, is more about how do we look at homelessness, mental illness, addiction, and trafficking through a different lens. How do we look at that by understanding people? I mean, I think when we say seeing the marginalized or exploited through eyes of grace, if we have to look at them through eyes of grace, we have to tell somebody how to view it, we're already acknowledging there's a problem. And so it's all about really being able to look at our own bias and judgments that we have of people. And if we can acknowledge our own bias and judgments, I think we can then look through to the hurting of the individual that, is in front of us and find ways to authentically engage help rather than harm. And so that, and then I'm Restoration House of Greater Kansas City, of course, is where I work. It's a long-term therapeutic home for victims of human trafficking in the Greater Kansas City area. And then Christine's Vision.Services, of course, is where I do all my advocacy and policy work. So I wear many hats.
Yes, I'm even more impressed. So, hey, thanks so much for coming on the Mental Health Warriors podcast. It was really, it was wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on here. It was great. I'll look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Yeah. So, I don't know, call me blown away by that. I'm sure you are too. Like, holy crap, man. Thank you, Christine. Like, I mean, you have these conversations with people sometimes and you're like, how is any of that even possible? Like, how I try to imagine myself in that situation. I mean, obviously I can't, but I feel like I would have folded like a cheap suit so far before she did. And yet she has crawled out of the pit and is helping people around the world. Like, fuck, man. Think about that. I don't really know what else to say about it, so I'm done. But I'll end this episode like I end every episode, and that's by saying if you are struggling, I want you to know that I've struggled too. And hey, I still struggle. Still get all fucked up sometimes. Okay, so if you ever want to talk to me, I won't judge you. If you want to live a meaningful and fulfilled life, I would consider giving that gift to somebody else because it really, literally makes that much of a difference. See you next time.